Scientists have discovered so many things, no doubt, but scientists should know the limitations of science. The physicist Louis Kiefaber, in what can be called a rationalist credo, stated that the world is orderly, knowable, and best known by human reason. Sean Carroll, an American theoretical physicist and philosopher, goes further. He doesn't say it's just best known. Rather, he defined naturalism not only as denying the existence of anything beyond nature, no spirits, no deities or anything else, but also, according to Sean Carroll, the chain of explanations concerning the things that happen in the universe ultimately reaches to the fundamental laws of nature and stops. That's it. According to Sean Carroll, an American theoretical physicist. That's a very telling term, isn't it? There are so many theoretical physicists. They're just dabbling around with, of course, they might be insulted if you say this, but they're dabbling around with complex mathematical theories applied to something which might resemble something in the world that we live in. In other words, Sean Carroll, according to his definition, naturalism is committed to the belief that the fundamental laws of physics can ultimately explain everything. Well, we have to give credit for their attempt to understand everything. It's ambitious to try to understand everything through our limited mind and senses. At least some humans, many humans throughout history, have an urge to know what's going on. That's called an intellectual, I guess.
Claim that the argument should be about what the word supernatural means, not the word natural. The natural world is the world that we learn about by doing science. The poetic part means that you shouldn't be too, I want to say, fundamentalist about what the natural world is. As we went from Newtonian space-time to Einsteinian space-time, something is maintained there. There is a different story that we can tell about the world. And that story in the Newtonian regime, if you want to fly a rocket to the moon, you don't use general relativity. You use Newtonian mechanics. That story works perfectly well. The poetic aspect of the story is that there are many ways of talking about the natural world. And as long as those ways latch on to something real and causally efficacious about the functioning of the world, then we attribute some reality and truth to them.
There's philosophical naturalism and there's methodological naturalism. And philosophical naturalism is this assertion that nothing but the natural exists. That's not, in my opinion, a defensible position at all, because it is an assertion that nothing but the natural exists, and I don't know how you came up with that. But there's methodological naturalism, which is basically the foundation of science, which is we can only investigate those things within nature. We have no mechanism for investigating things that aren't natural, and so we are going to confine our methodology to the realm of methodological naturalism. And it's not a pronouncement that the supernatural doesn't exist. It's an acknowledgement that because we cannot test for or confirm the supernatural, we're not going to make pronouncements that it is true or isn't true.
So if you take observability as your criterion of proper scientific method, then many scientific theories that we already hold would have to be considered non-scientific. Now, of course, many people have used the criterion of observability to try to disqualify the theory of intelligent design because it's true. You can't see the action of the designing agent in the remote past, but that same limitation applies to the competition to Darwinian theory as well.
When it comes to ultimate origins of the universe, of life, it seems certain that we can't understand it, at least not fully, with our limited mind, senses, and intelligence. Ludwig Wittgenstein, huge philosopher of the first half of the 20th century, he said, "The solution of the riddle of life in space and time lies outside space and time, and we are in space and time." Science cannot, by definition, go beyond space and time. So science and religion, or maybe philosophy, are largely different spheres. Science is impersonal, not concerned with experience. It's concerned with looking at the world as if we weren't persons, as if we didn't have bias and emotions. That's the meaning of objectivity, removing our personal take on anything and just trying to understand things as they are. That's what science attempts to do. Science is impersonal, objective, seeks to understand through human observation, intelligence, and reason. Religion, it's intensely personal and subjective. Religion is ultimately concerned with the relationship between us and God. And religion seeks spiritual revelation beyond space and time. We're looking at eternality. Science in this way, by being so impersonal and objective, is not a human endeavor in the sense that humans are not machines that simply, or robots that simply analyze things. So in that way, science dehumanizes us, and more so by saying that humans are chemicals. Life is just chemicals. Personality is just a result of chemicals. Love, hate, desire, the religious instinct, it's all just due to chemical interactions, maybe electric impulses within the brain. Whereas religion specifically aims for the human's highest development of consciousness. In other words, science, it doesn't seek to do this, but the effect is that science, the way it's generally propagated and understood, we're talking about the philosophy of science here, it wants to remove personality, to dehumanize us, whereas religion, in its ideal form, aims to take humans to or make us superhumans. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teaching, which I'm fortunate to follow, teaches that not to become a superhuman, but to become most humble. And that way we become superhuman in consciousness, by stopping thinking that I am the Lord of all that I survey, and simply become humble. Here's a perspective from the BBC, which we all know is most objective. On his website says, how come all the physical laws and parameters in the universe happen to have the values that allowed stars, planets, and ultimately life to develop? Some argue it's just a lucky coincidence. Others say we shouldn't be surprised to see bio-friendly physical laws. They, after all, produced us, so what else would we see? That's called the anthropic principle. We're here because we're here. Science. Continuing from the BBC, some theists, however, argue that it points to the existence of a God creating favorable conditions. But the BBC authoritatively tells us God isn't a valid scientific explanation. Well, if you want to say what science presents itself as, then God isn't a valid scientific explanation, because science, by its very nature, the way it's set up, is concerned with matter and doesn't. Materialism, scientific materialism, doesn't allow for any supernatural explanations. So God is not valid according to science, by definition. And the BBC confirms it. If we quote, God says in the Bible, BBC, we have to accept that, don't we? There are limits to how far we can go. There is an unlimited expanse of knowledge, even about this material world, what to speak of the spiritual world. And we have limited ability to know it. However much we know, there is infinitely more to be known. Therefore, our knowledge remains infinitesimal. Whatever we know about anything, we hardly know anything about it, because there's always much more to know. If we take the number 1 and the number 1 raised to the power of 500, which is beyond our imagination, both are infinitesimal in relationship to infinity. But this idea that by science we can understand everything, or science is the only way to understand everything, it breeds a kind of pride.
Having said that, it is a very interesting question, because a universe with a God would be a very different kind of universe than one without. So the most important reason is there simply are no reasons for the existence of a God. So the reasons against then would have to be you tick off on your fingers one by one the alleged reasons why there should be a God, such as the argument from design. Things look so beautifully designed, bananas and apples and things like that, and humans and kangaroos and so on. And they look as though they've been designed because that's what Darwinian natural selection does. It makes them look as though they're designed. It produces a very good simulacrum of design. I think that's the most important reason against, that Darwin has exploded once and for all the argument from design. Other reasons that have been offered, for example, people claim to have a subjective experience, a personal experience of God. Well, we all know how easily people are fooled, we all know how easily people hallucinate, how easily they imagine, how easily they dream. So that's an extremely poor argument in favor of the existence of a God. What other arguments are there? The argument from first cause, well, that shoots itself in the foot, because if you're going to postulate a God as a first cause, you've then got a really big problem explaining where the God came from. The whole point of the Darwinian enterprise is that it explains how you can get complexity and the illusion of design from primordial simplicity. So the argument from first cause shoots itself in the foot.
It would seem to naturally lead to atheism unless it's guided by the theistic instinct. We know so much. Look what we're doing. Look what we've discovered. We don't need any God. God created this world, and we created cell phones, space rockets, nuclear missiles. We are proud because we think we know much more than we did. Well, yeah, you could say. Scientists know more than they did 200 years ago. But still, we don't know how much we don't know. We can only know that what we don't know is always going to be infinitely more than what we do know. This naturalism or rationalism or materialism, scientific materialism, atheism rejects from the outset any belief in miracles or descriptions from ancient scriptures of things which don't seem possible. For instance, we have in Ramayana, central text of Hinduism, which according to its own tradition goes back millions of years. It was Rama, the protagonist of the Ramayana, appeared in this world millions of years ago. And there it describes the great demon Ravana as having 10 heads. Now, our more sober, scientifically minded people will say, well, that's only for stupid people, gullible, non-scientific people.
It looks like a string of pearls between two islands.
It looks to me like a rocky jetty, but this thing looks pretty big.
This isn't just a simple sandbar. There's objects in here that haven't been eroded away.
There are stones that have been brought from afar and set on top of our sandbar island chain.
Rocks on top of the sand actually predate the sand. So there's more to the story.
But arguably, belief in miracles or accepting the possibility of, it could be people who had 10 heads, arguably acceptance of the possibility of such things is for the most intelligent, whose intelligence is open to various possibilities and not closed by scientific dogma. Mass illusion, the scientists will say. Believe what you want to believe. Miracles happen. Scientific discoveries themselves may be miracles. Scientists, kindly consider, you have limitations. You're not all-knowing. You're never going to be all-knowing. You're definitely not all-powerful. The religious proposition is that there is God who is all-knowing, all-powerful.